Hello, everyone. Welcome to another special edition of Let's Talk 1943, the Business Spotlight Edition. I am honored to have Tony Hardman today, and we're going to talk about something that is actually in the headlines since yesterday, but it's been around forever. And we're going to get a little more in depth about depression and just handling your business and be able to become a better person out of it. So, as I always say, are you ready? Let's talk. We're back. So thank you once again for joining us today on Let's Talk 1943. And we have here Tony Hardman, and actually Tony has his own podcast as well. And he talks about a lot of things about depression, meditation, and getting through, just breaking through. So Tony, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you.
Hi, Regina. Yeah, it's great to be here and great to meet you. Thanks for having me as well.
Oh, no problem, no problem. So let's just go ahead and dive in. Like I was talking to you a little earlier today. Yesterday, the world was shocked when we heard about Twitch. He was a popular dancer first and foremost, and then he ended up being on the Ellen show for years, almost 10 years, and he took his life the day before. He was on TikTok dancing with his family, and literally 24 hours later, he took his own life. And so let's go into that and talk about that a little bit, and then, how that intertwines with you.
Yeah, I can't pretend to speak for what he was going through. I can only kind of go through my own lens. But as we were talking about before the show, it seems that, a lot of times some of the funniest people are the most, the people that have like the brightest bulbs that burn off and everybody's attracted to them. A lot of times there's sometimes people that suffer the most. It's really easy to not see that, what's kind of going beyond that. And I know, for me, as somebody who has gone through my own mental health journey, and I consider myself to be, significantly better, there are still times where I don't necessarily have suicidal thoughts anymore, but there's definitely times where I feel like, I don't want to be around anymore, or, sometimes I feel, and these are rare moments, but like things would be better off if they would end. And that's too, like, why I talk about the importance of like building a mental health routine. It's really important to kind of maintain that and stay on that. But yeah, it's incredibly sad what happened, and I can't imagine what he went through. And I know, through having African American friends, being a man and being in the African American community, like having mental health issues is one thing, but that adds on a whole layer of complexity that I don't pretend to understand, but can only imagine how challenging that must have been.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Thank you for acknowledging that. I do appreciate that. So, how do you conquer your anxiety? What led you, to be able to lead this life that you live in now?
Yeah, so conquering anxiety is kind of like a little bit of a more of a narrower topic on what I talk about as a whole. So I'll start with that. So primarily, what I focus on is this idea of mental flexibility, and this concept comes from something called acceptance and commitment therapy. So acceptance and commitment therapy was started in the 1980s by a psychotherapist named Stephen Hayes, and I'll talk about why I believe that it works so well. So if you are struggling in any way and you go to seek help and you call a psychologist, or you look up in your insurance like who covers you, a lot of times they're going to put you with a cognitive behavioral therapist. Now, technically, ACT therapy is part of CBT, but it's drastically different in my experience. And here's kind of how it's different. So in CBT, a lot of times they try to train you to change your thoughts, change the way you think. Like, one of the things I remember my therapist saying to me was, whenever you're having like a negative thought or a struggle with something, or you're kind of going down the path of anxiety, try to put a stop sign up in your mind and redirect those thoughts. But I could never do that. I could never get rid of my anxiety. And honestly, I don't know many people that can, and that's why I struggled for, 20 plus years. Luckily, that same therapist recommended something called ACT therapy, and it's based around this idea of mental flexibility on 6 core processes. And we can go into those processes, but the idea is about adapting to different situations so that you're not overcoming your anxiety. You're learning how to make room for the anxiety, stop it from like hooking you and your anxious thoughts kind of taking you down a path and controlling the way you think, and then also identifying your core values and living your life based on those values. And by doing all those things together, you can find more joy and fulfillment in life. And that's how it worked for me.
Wow, and that tells you a lot. Just for you to be able to explain that to me tells me that you did your work and you understand everything that's happening or happened to you, and that's the key, is to know that, so you'll be able to stop yourself from going back down that rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. So my therapist was actually the one that was like, about, this is I think 8 months ago. She's like, you don't need therapy anymore. She got a promotion, and she could have passed me off to another therapist, but she's like, you don't need therapy anymore. But part of the process of like having my blog and having my podcast is part of that mental health routine. And I also meditate daily as well too. And if I don't maintain it, I start to struggle. And I'll give you some circumstances that have come up for me. So in July, I broke my ankle, and I was in a boot for like 5+ weeks.
Mm.
Literally the week after I broke my ankle, I got COVID, and I was sick for like a week. 3 weeks after that, I got the flu. Then
Oh,
that flu turned into a sinus infection. And then I was on vacation right after that. And on vacation, I got COVID again a second time, which I was shocked because
what?
I'm triple vaxxed, and I had just had it, but I got it again. So like all these things were happening at the same time. Additionally, with inflation and other things going on in our life, we've had a lot of financial stress. So the past second, maybe not quite the whole second half of 2022, but certainly several months have been really, really hard. And so I actually had a call with my psychiatrist yesterday, because I still use a mood stabilizer to maintain. And she's like, I'm shocked you're doing as well as you are because of all those things. And it's because I have the mental flexibility to like adapt to these things, to where I'm still kind of going. I'm not where I'd like to be right now, if I'm
Mhm,
honest. And that's kind of what, my podcast is all about, is this idea of Not Quite Zen, is, being honest about that it's a continual journey, and you're not always going to be perfect.
mhm.
But yeah, so I work hard to try to maintain it and keep going.
Yeah, and I actually listened to your podcast, the one that you had with your wife,
Oh yeah,
and
that was a fun one.
yes, it was, because I love the transparency, the honesty, and to be able to say, you know what, I was kind of the jerk right then. I was,
Yeah.
and for her to be able to be open to say, oh, during this time, it's like I try to talk to you and you wouldn't, listen, or I would just listen. It was so intriguing because, you don't hear that often, that you give each other that space to say, hey, we passed that, but it did bother me when, or you'll say, well, yeah, you were right. I shouldn't have done that, and it just opens it up to show that y'all are very transparent. So I love that conversation that you and your wife had.
Yeah. So we're about to celebrate our 16th anniversary. We're recording this in December right now, and in a couple weeks, we're going to have our 16th anniversary. And we've been lucky enough to stay married for so long for a couple of different reasons. Communication is obviously being a very important one, but my wife she would never give up. Even during those really hard times, she never gave up on me. She kept going, even though there were times when she was miserable. And so, yeah, we have a lot of open, honest communication about it now. But even
Mhm,
as somebody who has gone through all this and gotten better, that fear is still there for her. The fact, everything I just described that I had gone through since July, she's starting to see, like, I'm still holding it together, but cracks are forming, right? If I'm being honest about my experience.
mhm,
And I know that she's worried about that. And that's part of the reason why I met with my psychiatrist. And I'm also going to temporarily go back to therapy for a short period of time, just to work through these issues continually. And that's kind of the importance of like that evolving journey. And it also leads me kind of to another one of those 6 core processes of ACT therapy, and it's this idea of values. So values and committed action, they're 2 core processes,
mhm,
and they're both intertwined. So one of my core values is being a good husband and father. And the
mhm.
idea of committed action is you identify your core values, and then you start taking small actions every day towards those values. And if you do that, then your life will be much more fulfilling. And I'd be happy to go into more detail about how that works.
Yeah, yeah. That, I mean, you can.
Yeah. So think about it this way. So this, in the ACT therapy model, they have this thing called a choice point. So if you imagine a circle and kind of 2 arrows going off to the left and the right of it, you have towards moves on the right and away
Mhm,
moves on the left. And so every time you make a decision, you're either moving toward, a lot of times, you're
mhm.
moving towards the life you want to live or away from the life that you want to live. And what prevents it, what causes us to make a lot of away moves, is like getting hooked
Mhm.
by anxious thoughts. And we can learn to unhook from those thoughts to make more towards moves. And one of the ways to do that is to identify your values and make those things. So for me, my therapist, here's a way to do it. My therapist asked me, think about your funeral. What do you want people to say about you? How do you want to be remembered? And that was a really powerful question for me. And I thought about it. And that was the first thing that came to my mind, was being a good husband and father, because I
Mm-hmm.
didn't have great fathers as a role model. I had, struggles as a child, and I wanted to be that for my kids. And so during that time, I started, being more present in moments, noticing things that they were doing. And then an opportunity came up to coach my son's soccer team. I played a little soccer, when I was a kid, but I'm not well versed in it, and I
Mm-hmm.
had a ton of anxiety about doing it, but they really needed a coach and I wanted my son to play. So I was like, I'm going to commit to doing this. And I'll never forget, the day of my first practice that came up right before, before I had to leave, I was having almost a panic attack. Not quite that bad. I was just very, very anxious about it.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife was actually mad at me. She's like, why are you doing this to yourself? Like, why are you pushing yourself to do this? And my response to her was, because I have to. And then, so I went, and I got through it. And then I got through a couple more practices. And then we ended up having an amazing season. We didn't lose any games.
Oh,
And I've coached, 4 seasons in a row now. And it's something I love. And additionally, doing that small act of overcoming that or conquering that anxiety allowed me to take on things that I wouldn't in the past, like a DIY project. Like, I'm not a handy person, but I don't have that
me
same
either.
anxiety about stuff anymore. I'm like, I'll try it. I'll give it a try. I'm not afraid anymore. And to your earlier question, how do you conquer anxiety? That's how you conquer anxiety. You identify a core value and then you make small steps every day to move towards them. Mine was a little bit bigger, but I still try to maintain those small steps.
So you had mentioned earlier about meditation and
Mhm.
how you use that on a daily basis. So, can you tell me the method of meditation you use and how often do you do it a day, or do it? What's your
Yeah,
step?
yeah. So, more important than meditation is another one of those 6 core processes, and it's idea called contact with the present moment. It,
Mm-hmm.
it can somewhat be interchangeably used with mindfulness, but it's a little bit different. And mindfulness can be a bit of a dodgy word, because it gets caught up with connotations of religion or other things, and people don't fully understand what it means. But let's just talk about contact with the present to start. So before I started a meditation practice, going through ACT therapy, I had to learn how to be in the moment. And that's a really important thing, especially if you're dealing with anxiety and depression, because a lot of times you're ruminating about past things or things that may or never happen, and you're lost and you're thinking about the future or thinking about the past. So if you can connect to the present, then you can kind of live life and find more joy. So one of the first things my therapist had me do was start noticing little moments throughout the day. So she said, for the next 2 weeks, I just want you to notice little things. And this was also around the holidays several years ago. And I'll never forget, my son sitting in Santa's lap. And I was just fully present in that moment, and present as my kids were like, opening presents and being there. And that was so powerful for me. This idea of being in the present.
Right.
And, I had the Calm app, but I didn't really use it that much. So then I started meditating. And meditation is a way to kind of hone that practice in a more structured way a little bit. So I typically do it before I go to bed for 10 minutes. I'll do the daily Calm. And it's just a moment for me to set aside and just like be in the now. And it's especially helpful for a really like overwhelming day of just taking that time to pause. And as I was, going through learning this about contacting with the present moment, I was meditating probably 3 times a day, but now I really only need to do it once to maintain.
Okay. But 10 minutes a day, 3 times a day is not a bad thing. That's 30 minutes of a
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
you break it in 10 minute increments. You do it morning, lunchtime,
Yeah.
and before you go to bed. So
Yeah. If you're
it's
disciplined, it's
a
great. It's
Zen.
great.
Say it again.
Yeah. If you're disciplined enough to do that, that's great. And I'll use it too. Like if I'm having a rough day, if I'm stressed about something, I'll take 30 seconds, 90 seconds or whatever. So it's a great tool.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. So when you're talking about anxiety or panic attack, is that something that it's something you think about, overly thinking about something, and you kind of don't see the answer to it and you start getting nervous, and then that's how it starts? Like, what would be a anxiety issue?
Yeah, so that's how it can show up for some people. It can show up in a lot of different ways. That's definitely one. For me, it's like it's just a lot of worry about things like how are we going to make this work, or how are we going to do that, or what if this happens, or what if that happens, and it's just kind of being caught up in those things all the time. And so like I've learned to ease anxiety by kind of unhooking from anxious thoughts. So this is another of
Mhm.
those 6 core processes, and it's this idea called cognitive diffusion. So when I was talking earlier about this getting hooked by thoughts towards away moves in your life instead of making towards moves to the life you want to live.
Mm-hmm.
It's getting hooked like, for example, let's say you tell yourself all the time that you're not good enough. Well, that's fusion, right? You're fused with this idea that you are not good enough, and you start to believe those things. It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of like, I don't know if you ever saw the movie Soul, that Disney Pixar movie, but if you haven't, I suggest watching it. There's a great scene towards the end where one of the main characters, they're kind of like, there's these black shadows like over her, and they're her negative thoughts, and they're kind of like she's stuck in these negative thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And so to overcome anxiety or to ease anxiety, you can do different unhooking techniques. So like, as an example, reminding yourself that it's just a thought, not a fact. So instead of saying I'm not good enough, it's I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. And it's a
Oh,
subtle difference, but it's a powerful one because you realize you don't, it's your brain sometimes in the way that you think, it can be like a haywire GPS. It can tell you to go a million different ways, but if you can kind of step back and observe them, then you can gain more context and realize that maybe it's not necessarily true. Some other techniques are, oh, that's just the I'm not good enough story again, right? If it's something that you're
mhm.
constantly telling yourself, giving the story a name and acknowledging it, like acknowledging your brain. Because if you think about anxiety, it's from kind of, our ancestors to keep you safe, right? It's your brain's way of trying to keep you safe. And so you say, thanks, brain, but that's just the I'm not good enough story again. And you let it go. And when I say let it go, there's other techniques too. So it's not getting rid of anxiety, it's
Mhm.
analyzing it and figuring out, what do I need to do with this thought? So if it's something like that and it's not helpful, well, if you're trying to work or you're trying to go about your day, when you're having these things, you can't make progress. So you can visualize this negative thought as and place it on like a leaf in a stream
Right.
in your mind and let it flow down the stream. Or think of it
Mhm.
like a pop-up window. Like, nope, don't need that right now. I'm going to keep going about my day. Or if it's something that you do need to deal with, then set aside a time to deal with it. Write it down and write down your anxious thoughts and ways that you can address them. And so building that practice makes it really effective to kind of ease and overcome anxiety.
That's some great tips. So I hope my audience is listening and taking notes on that, because that's a great way. So let's talk about anger. So
Oh
let's
yeah.
say you get upset and you get angry, and so how do you control the anger and redirect it in a positive light?
That is an incredibly tough thing to do. It's something that I certainly still struggle with. In fact, my nickname in high school was Angry Tony. And a lot of
Oh my
times,
gosh.
yeah, a lot of times anxiety in men will show up as anger. And it can, I'm not a psychiatrist, but from reading, it's a lot of times related to the cortisol levels in your mind. But there are ways to kind of diffuse a little bit from anger. So number one, a lot of times people have this idea that like you go from 0 to 100 really fast, and it's true, like anger can move quickly, but there
Mhm.
is a micro moment before you go off the handle that you can kind of recognize and step back. And there's sometimes that I'm good at it, and there's sometimes that I'm not. Or sometimes I'll say something in anger, or like I'll get amped up really quickly, but then
Okay.
I'll just take a step back for a second and I'll say, okay, I'll take a deep breath, let me try to deal with it. So like some of the strategies for me to deal with anger are, I try to recognize that micro moment. I give myself space if I need to. So like one of the things I'll often do if I feel getting like a heated conversation with my wife is I'll say, I need 10 minutes, and I'll go sit and I'll meditate and I'll calm down, and then I'll come back and I'll, try to have a more rational conversation with her.
Right.
But yeah, it's just, you have to realize that anger doesn't have to control you, and you don't have to let it. And just being honest about your feelings and owning up to what you do. I've had to apologize more times than I care to admit, unfortunately, but it's not an excuse, right? You have to continually work on these things.
Yeah, you definitely do. So let's talk about depression as a whole. What do depression look like? Because a lot of people go through things, but they don't know they actually going through depression. They just probably think it's a bad day for a long time, a long bad day. You know?
Yeah. So again, I'm not a psychiatrist, but in my experience, sometimes where I've experienced what they would call like clinical depression is I can get really down and sad in a spiral, and there may seemingly be no reason for it at all. Like I can't pinpoint why do I feel this way, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of different symptoms that show up. It's just feeling tired all the time and having no motivation to do anything and just feeling really sad and hopeless. Hopelessness is probably one of the biggest things, feeling depressed. And so you're just like, if you think of the word blues, like that is a really good way to like categorize depression. And I think like, it's normal for everybody to experience some levels of depression from time to time.
Right.
I think when it becomes a problem is if it's been multiple weeks or it's going on for a long time, or it's really affecting your ability to live your life or, make progress in your life or do the things that you want to do. That's when you really need to, get help for that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And as we talked at the beginning of the show, was a lot of times the ones you least expect, because the ones that usually smiling and laughing and joking and actually they're people pleasing or trying to make you laugh. You think, how can they be depressed because they laughing all the time, or they
Yeah.
happy, they smiling all the time. But from what you were telling me, a little snippet of what you told me is that's that mask that you wear to cover up to actually how you really feel. Like that commercial when you see her holding
Yeah.
that sign.
100%. I'm glad you brought that up again, because I think let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
I think this is why I love the fact that you have your podcast, and it's also one of the motivating factors for me is that there has for such a long time been such a stigma around mental health that nobody talked about it. So Twitch was what I think in his 40s. So I'm
Just turned
almost
40.
yeah.
Yeah.
So same, like I'm 39 as well, and
Mhm.
it's just not something that we grew up to talk about. I asked my mom to take me to therapy when I was a kid. She took me to one appointment and then never took me again, even though I found it helpful, because I was never shy about asking for help. I just didn't get the help I needed. But other people, it's hard to ask for that help. So I think like it's really important to have these conversations. I think it's even more important to have these conversations with the people in your life.
Mhm.
Like in the United States and even, I don't know where your listeners are from, but in the UK, they'll say, "You all right?" Or, they'll say, "How you doing?" And we'll answer like, "Oh, I'm good." But it's not a genuine answer. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that like you always have to be genuine with that, but like for the people that you care about, like really try to dig a little deeper and have those conversations and really find out how they're doing and support them and let them know that it's a safe space to talk about things that are going on in their life. And I think the more people that do what you're doing, and the more people that are brave enough to have these conversations, hopefully, we'll see less and less of these types of things happening.
Yeah, and it really touched me. It touched me every time because he's not the first.
No.
Just that you see it as a younger person, as someone that you don't know people, and we kind of see them and we just take them from face value, and we don't dig deeper because we think if you're smiling, everything's okay, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
We really don't. But then it's kind of like, well, how can you just go to everybody like you smiling, but are you really happy? Like, it's like you don't know how to really handle it if you're not trained, unless you know that person that well, like your wife knows you. So she'll know that, okay, you
Yeah.
smiling, but something's not right. But if you
I
don't
would
know,
say, yeah, I would say so. Usually there's calls for help. There's cries for help.
mhm,
Most people do. I can't speak for Twitch, or his
yes,
family,
of course.
but I would imagine if it followed how a lot of people experience depression and these sort of things, there are, cries for help. It can be subtle, like it can be a subtle comment, or it could be as overt as like, I don't want to be around anymore, or I think the world would be better off without me. And those are the things that like you need to watch out for. So
Right.
when I was in the military, we went through suicide prevention training. And one of the best things that I ever learned about this as somebody who used to be suicidal is it's this concept of it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And when you're dealing with depression, it's really, really hard to see that. And that's why it's so important to develop these types of coping skills that I had talked about, and these mentally flexible processes of being able to unhook from these thoughts. Because when they grab you and hold on to you and drag you down, if you have no way to fight back or unhook from them, then you're just going to keep going in a spiral, and that's
Yeah.
where you can find help through, therapy or like a coach, that sort of thing, whatever, a group, support group, or just a friend and a family to talk to somebody. And then the other thing I would say too about suicide is if somebody does have a cry for help, and you're not sure what to do, the best thing to do is to make a plan with them to go get help and follow up on that plan, make sure they do it. So especially if they're saying like, I'm suicidal right now, I'm going to do this, like, promise me you won't do it right now. I'll come over. Let's go to the hospital. Let's go to the ER, or, let's call your psychiatrist, whatever it may be. Like, that's the way to do it.
Right. Is it the number? Is it 988? If I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah, recently, I think it was a month or two ago, finally, the national hotline for suicide prevention is 988. So great to remember
Yeah.
that too.
Yeah, please, audience, my family, like I said, believe it or not, this was not planned. Like, I mean, we had this scheduled for today, but that just happened yesterday, and we scheduled this weeks ago. So it just happened to just coincide together. So I always believe in divine order. So there's a reason for everything. So if you had any thoughts or any feelings of doing something to harm yourself, or you just don't feel good, or something's not right and you just can't pinpoint it yourself, you need extra help, please, 988 is the new hotline number. You could call it or text it. And when you do that, somebody's there waiting on you to give you help and try to guide you to someone locally, but they will at least be with you until you'll be able to get, I guess you want to say, ongoing help.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so
And I would
that's
say, like, going further beyond just like anxiety and depression,
mhm.
for me, going through this process and learning about mental flexibility has really created a place in my life that I never thought I would get to where, like, I would say overall, like, I'm relatively happy. Like, I have joy in my life, and I never used to feel that way before. And I'm
Mhm.
able to like make progress. I had enough confidence to start a podcast, and I just hit my year anniversary, and I'm growing, and my blog is
Congratulations.
growing. Thank you. Yeah, and so like, I'm making progress in my journey, and it's an ongoing thing. But I have the tools that I need to do it, and it's such a wonderful thing.
Yes, it is, and I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of you because you did the work. And your wife is your rock, and she's helped
That's
you
true.
get through. And it's just amazing, like I said, just to open my eyes to, because we all have moments. I had a breakdown in 2019 September, and I didn't know what was happening to me. I couldn't even describe it. It's hard to describe. It really
Mhm.
is. It's just that you're somewhere you never been, and somewhere you don't want to go back, but there's somewhere you knew it had to happen. It's like one of those
Yeah,
things that had to happen, because you didn't have it, you wouldn't be where you at today. So, that's the best way I could describe what happened to me.
it's
But
hard and it's scary when that happens for sure.
mhm,
And I would say too, whether you're somebody that is newly experiencing these types of things, or you're someone who's dealt with it a long time, the best thing you can do is just to be persistent. Like, I never gave up on therapy. There were times where I walked away for a year or so, but I came back, and I eventually got better. And had I not continued to come back, I wouldn't be where I am today.
that's right. That's right. And I did get help too, and that
Good
helped
for you.
really. Yeah, I had to, because I had to find the core of the reason. The core. I was like feeding the symptoms, but I wasn't at the core. And when I figured out the core, everything just fell right into line. Everything just fell right into line, because everything made sense.
Good for you.
So
That's
yeah,
awesome. Great.
thank you, and congratulations again for your podcast. Can you please let us know before we leave today about your podcast? We get some of my listeners to check you out.
Yeah, definitely. So you can, wherever you listen to podcasts, just search for Not Quite Zen. I also have a newsletter that comes out every Tuesday that you can go to either in the show notes and sign up for it, or you can go to my website, which is at the bottom of the screen, but it's notquitezen.co. And soon I'm going to be coming out with a free email course on strategies for unhooking with anxiety. So if you want to hear about that, be sure to sign up, and you'll be one of the first ones.
Yes, I did check out your website. It's a nice website, and it has a page that you can put your information and send him your contact, and he'll get you plugged into all these things that he's talking about. So
Yep.
yeah, so thank you so much, Tony, for joining us today. I learned a lot from you. Thank you for allowing us to speak about current events with you today. I really appreciate that. So, do you have like a final word you want to give someone who's at that point that they don't know what to do?
Yeah, that's such a tough thing. First of all, thank you for having me. It's great talking with you, and I'm really honored to be on the show, and to have a part of your platform. I would just say, like, talk to somebody, let somebody know what you're going through. You are not alone. So many people deal with these things. It's normal, and it's part of being human. So, find a therapist or talk to a loved one. And there's a lot of ways to kind of make progress if you're stuck. If you've been going to therapy for a long time and it's not working for you, then reevaluate that relationship. Maybe you need a new type of therapy. Maybe you need a new type of therapist. Maybe you need to see a psychiatrist. Going back to what I said earlier, I'd say the biggest thing is just be persistent. I not only was act therapy and mental flexibility a huge, that was the big leap for me. That was the big thing that shifted me into a life that I feel is worth living and a life that's joyful. But before that, I went to anger management. I went to CBT therapy for years and years, and all those things together created this mental flexibility toolkit to where I have lots of different things to deal with. So if I can do it, anybody can do it.
That's right. Amen. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So until next time, everyone, let's talk 1943. This is the Business Spotlight Edition. If you're interested in sharing your story, your product, your service, your business, please reach out to me. Let's talk 1943 at gmail.com. Very simple. Or my website, www.letstalk1943.com. So until next time, God bless. Have a good one. Take care.